Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Spiritual Cake Podcast. This is where we talk about anything and everything that has to do with that spiritual side of our existence. You're familiar with the physical and the mental and the emotional, but we have been discussing the spiritual, whatever that is. My name is Clint Hufton. With me is Wendy Dahl. Wendy.
Hi, Clint.
Hello, Wendy. If you're joining us for the first time, you should know that neither Wendy nor I run any kind of a religious organization, nor has our formal education been along those lines. We were both raised relatively conservative Christian. Wendy is Mormon. I was raised Lutheran, but have since explored a lot of different philosophies and theologies. Plus, we are both in the event industry with an international clientele, and that has exposed us to a lot of different cultures and traditions and rituals, and we bring all of that into this conversation. And that's exactly what it is. Don't get overexcited. It's a conversation. And if you want to join the conversation, then at the end of this episode, we will tell you how to do that. Wendy, I think it was last episode where we were talking about the role of Judas, the Passion Week, and the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. Do you remember how we were talking about Judas and his? There's all this
Yeah.
like drama around Judas, rightfully so. I was under the impression that Jesus asked Judas to play this very intense role, bringing the Romans and blah, blah, blah to arrest Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. And he played that role, Judas did, as opposed to people saying that Judas was the ultimate betrayer. But do you remember that conversation?
I do.
I don't understand how the universe works, but you know that website Quora,
Yeah,
Quora?
yeah.
You
hmm
ask questions, and supposedly people that know what they're talking about will answer the questions. So this is Quora. And the question was, why did Jesus betray Jesus since everyone knew him? And the answer from a theologian of over 35 years standing, a Christian minister, Judas did not betray Jesus. We're looking at 2,000 years of bias and an egregious mistranslation. This is what caught my attention. The mistranslation. The Gospels are written in pidgin dialect of Greek called Koine, which was the lingua franca of the Roman Empire at the time. Does it make sense to you that there was a dialect and it was the colloquial language of that particular time and place, the Roman Empire? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Of the four gospelers, Luke and John have the best grasp of Koine Greek, parentheses Luke because he was a doctor, therefore educated, and John probably because his gospel was written much later than the other three, so he took more time to polish his knowledge of the language. Matthew's Koine is workable. If he was the apostle Matthew, then as a tax collector, he interacted regularly with Roman occupiers and used Koine in his business. Mark's Koine is rubbish. I think that's kind of funny. We in the West no longer speak or read Koine Greek. As a matter of course, for us, the Bible was first translated into Latin and then into other languages, including English. The Koine word used by all four gospelers to describe what Judas did to Jesus was paradidomi, Paradidomi, paradidomi. Centuries of translators have rendered into English as betrayed, but every other time the word paradidomi appears in the gospel text, translators render it into English as gave up, or handed over. Well, that's a different ballgame. Would you agree with that?
I mean, I've always wondered about the translation of things because of the differences in dialects and languages. Interesting. I'm fascinated by his opinions.
I agree. I think we need to identify a couple of things. Number one, this is a guy's opinion, but he does seem fairly educated, and he's using words that I didn't know. And then, if that's the criteria for being educated, that's kind of funny. And the other thing is, we agreed at the very beginning of our podcast, some 200 some episodes ago, that words are just symbols to
Mhm.
try to communicate concepts or objects. And so we're kind of in that realm right now in regard to the words that were used for the people that wrote the Gospels and then how it was translated later. All right, so let's continue. When Jesus is handed over to Pilate, paradidomi. When Pilate handed over Jesus to be crucified, paradidomi. When Jesus gave up his spirit on the cross, paradidomi. Even when Jesus is talking about his arrest to his disciples, he says the Son of Man must be handed over, which is the same event as him being in the garden with Judas. That's paradidomi too. Only when it is used in reference to Judas is the word paradidomi translated into English as betrayed, a sense that the Greek word simply does not have. This is entirely a bias of the first translators who wanted the story to have a villain, which, you know what, that's common in today's storytelling. There's got to be
Absolutely.
the most recent movie that is out in the theaters right now is the one about Michael Jackson. Have you seen it yet?
Oh yeah, we saw last Friday night.
And that story makes Michael Jackson's father the villain. I mean,
Yeah.
clear as day. Every story, I guess, if you have a hero, you have to have an opposite of that. So, but the text also clearly states that Judas hands Jesus over in all caps because Jesus told him to. That's what I said. What you are to do, do quickly. There's no sense of betrayal in the Greek text at all. They arranged it between them. Yep. I think that's fascinating. What do you think of all of this so far?
I mean, it could possibly be true. And doesn't it sound like Jesus? Like in all the readings and studying that you've done about Jesus, he almost seems to me to have wisdom beyond what we expect him to have. And so when it comes to his relationship with Judas and when he knew what was to happen, he knew it would have to be somebody that turned him over. And wouldn't you rather have a friend do that than have a foe do it? And it also opens the door to questions about as far as Judas's role, like why was he the one that had to turn him over? Was he a friend that was involved with all of the politicking and had to do it because that was his job? I mean, I don't, it's interesting. Like because he's the villain, I really haven't spent too much time studying Judas.
We did talk in the previous episode about in order for Jesus to do everything that needed to be done, there's two parts to that needed to be done. One was to fulfill the prophecies from the Old Testament that talked about the Messiah, to make sure he checked all those boxes, and then also to do the job of being the ultimate sacrifice and that sort of
Yeah.
thing. If you look at what happened in the Garden of Gethsemane when Peter tried to defend Jesus and cut off the soldier's ear, and then Jesus immediately puts it back on. I would love to have seen that. Then it was obvious that Peter couldn't do the job. And so when you think about the 12 disciples, that Jesus decided, here's a guy, Judas, that will do the job. Because maybe Jesus explained to him, this has to be done in order for the grand sacrifice to be accomplished. I can't rise from the dead if I don't die. It makes sense that Jesus identified the singular personality that would understand the concept and be able to do it. So that aroused my curiosity. And so I went to the third member of our podcast, which is ChatGPT. I asked, are there other passages or words in the Christian Bible? I thought I should designate the Christian Bible because we've talked about how there's a lot of different Bibles.
Yeah.
The Christian Bible that might be incorrectly translated from the original text. And ChatGPT, being the ever supportive friend of mine, said, that's a great question. Number one, virgin versus young woman, Isaiah chapter 7, verse 14. The Hebrew word alma, Almah. The original meaning, young woman, not explicitly a virgin. The Greek translation, Septuagint, Septuagint, Septuagint. Parthenos equals virgin. I like the ChatGPT will include why this matters in this particular translation of that word. The shift influences how the passage was later understood as prophecy about the birth of Jesus. Some scholars argue the original Hebrew didn't require a miraculous virgin birth interpretation. As long as I have been around Christian theology, that virgin birth thing was critical in order to establish, I guess, the deity in human form, which is Jesus Christ. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So let's continue. Hell. See, this is great. I have been curious about the concept of hell for quite a while. Not that I'm afraid of it. I just have different ideas of what it is. Hell as a single place. There's multiple terms combined. The original words, Sheol, which is Hebrew, Hades, Gehenna, Tartarus, which is Greek, and why it matters. These words refer to different concepts: grave, afterlife, a burning garbage valley.
Interesting. A burning garbage valley.
That's so relevant to today's climate challenges. Oh, or a place for fallen angels. Now, that's interesting to me. English translations often collapse them all into hell, which creates a more unified and sometimes harsher idea than the original text suggests. That would free up so many people that are scared to death of what's going to happen after they die. And say, wait a minute, the Mormon traditions don't have a hell the way it's normally envisioned in all of the mythology and the stories, do they? I mean, you have different levels, but there isn't really a hell like a burning fire pit of destruction
Sure,
type of thing.
there is.
There is?
You know, it's interesting. This is my interpretation of it because they talk a lot about outer darkness and then hell with fire and brimstone. I've always contemplated what hell is and how hell would be different to different people.
Yes.
Like let's say there's an afterlife and that all of your friends and family did not go to hell. And if you saw them in another place, and you weren't there with them, would that be your hell? Or would your hell be like what they say about Judas, where he killed himself because he felt so bad? And so, like, would you even want to be around somebody? Like, let's say you're a murderer or you did something horribly wrong in this life and you did go to hell. Maybe you just feel bad about that forever. And isn't that feeling of feeling bad about something that you did wrong awful? And wouldn't that feel like outer darkness to you? Because you're literally like casting yourself out because of what you've did. So like your remorse and your guilt is something that you have to live with. This is just me talking and contemplating how I've always thought about hell and thinking about, living with Satan and like evil doers and stuff like that. I mean, I know that there's a category of people out there that do bad things that don't think it's bad. But then there's a category of people that do bad things and know it's bad and they feel guilty about it.
And you bring up an interesting point in terms of the eternity of it. It reminds me
Hmm.
of Greek mythology of the character that was rolling the big boulder up the hill and then it would always roll down and he had to keep doing that forever. Or the
Yes.
one who a bird would eat one of his internal organs and then he would heal and then the bird would come back and do it again for all eternity and
Yeah.
stuff like that. And also the phrase of that would be my personal hell. That's kind of a colloquial thing that people talk about if they're in an environment that they imagine, oh no, that would be my personal hell, whatever it
Yes.
is. You brought up Satan. What a wonderful serendipitous moment. Number 3, Lucifer as Satan. Isaiah chapter 14, verse 12. The Latin Vulgate Lucifer equals morning star or light bringer. I would never have attached those to the word Lucifer. The original context likely referring to a Babylonian king. Oh, okay, that's possible. Why it matters. Later tradition interpreted Lucifer as a name for Satan, but in context, it appears to be political satire about a fallen ruler, not a literal account of the devil's origin, based in the book of Isaiah in the Old Testament. That's kind of funny, in my opinion, that they're making fun of a guy. And now it becomes religious text and all kinds of stuff. That just shows you there have been a number of religious leaders or spiritual thought leaders and that sort of stuff that don't want to start a church, that don't want to start any kind of an organization because they don't trust humans to maintain the purity of the message. And I get that 100%. Repent is the number 4. The Greek is metanoia. The original meaning, to change one's mind or to transform one's thinking. The common translation is repent, often implying guilt, remorse, or turning from sin. And why this matters. The original sense leans more toward inner transformation and perspective shift rather than purely moral regret. I have thought this for a long time, not to blow my own horn, but I always felt that what Jesus was trying to communicate when he said repent and sin no more, it's the sin no more that is the most important part of that sentence because he just wanted people to stop the behavior that would be classified as sin. So I guess the repent is identify it as something that needs to be changed and then change it. You've heard a million times that it doesn't make any difference what you think or what you say. All that matters is really what you do. Does that make sense? That it's about
Hmm.
changing your behavior as opposed to feeling eternal remorse or guilt. Although,
Yep.
if the remorse or guilt is the thing that changes the concept or one leads to the other, which then leads to the change of behavior, you're still accomplishing the same goal in
Right.
terms of repent. Then homosexual. 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 9. The Greek terms arsenokoidal and malakoi, direct meanings, debated, possibly men who exploit others sexually or soft or morally weak. And why this matters, the modern word homosexual didn't exist in ancient languages. Translating these terms that way is a relatively recent choice and remains heavily debated amongst scholars. Well, it certainly is a huge thing for what we would call the fundamental religions. And it's not just Christianity. I mean, like, there's a whole thing about homosexuals amongst a lot of religions. Does that make sense?
Hmm.
There was a play that I was in. It was made into a movie. It was set in like England and Normandy. So there was based on a real person. So there was a king who had 3 sons. There's a part in the play that alluded to the fact that his one son, who was a warrior, I guess homosexuality was just kind of like part of the deal with you're around only men and you're out at war. It wasn't said explicitly, but it makes you think that the sexual behavior back in the day wasn't interpreted as strictly as it has been today. I realize that what I'm saying is very controversial and that kind of stuff, but I'm just, like I said, this is just a conversation and we're just trying to kind of figure things out. And it's interesting that ChatGPT would bring up homosexual as being mistranslated. What do you think of that so far in terms of language and this particular term?
I mean, wouldn't that make sense? I mean, I guess that asks it gets me into the bigger question of like, what did they call it? Based on what we can see in all the readings and translations, you don't really see it mentioned.
So there's a character in the TV show West Wing who plays the president, President Bartlett, played by Martin Sheen. There's people that are there at the White House to meet him, and one of them is a very right conservative woman, has been publishing all kinds of stuff against homosexuality, and he questions her and challenges the concept because it's all based on apparently one verse, maybe in Leviticus. And he just says, well, if you're going to take that literally, then what about this? And what about this? And what about this? Which is a common argument in regards to the interpretation that homosexuality is a sin. So that's been going on forever. I wonder if, the concept that I have that people are really scared if you question one thing in the structure or the foundation of their religious belief, then does that bring into question everything that they believe, which then brings them to the point of terror? So this whole thing about questioning the interpretations of the original text, in my opinion, it's valid and safe because I'm not worried about the afterlife, whereas other people might be, they just don't want to go down this rabbit hole because it could shake up everything that they quote unquote believe in. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
What do you think about all of this whole thing about the translations and the words and the specificity and all that?
Well, I think it kind of follows the theme that we follow, where curiosity is wisdom. It's like, well, what if it doesn't mean that? And I mean, to me, it's always like knowledge is always expanding. Knowledge isn't a stagnant thing. We're always learning and growing. And so I think it's important to stay curious and to look at possibilities when new knowledge comes, not to be so like, oh my gosh, I'm shook down to my foundation. Because I know that that can happen too.
It's not just religious concepts. It's
No.
everything. Any change scares humans
Yeah, well,
so
sure.
deeply.
Yes, but when you come from a place of curiosity and hope and like, well, that's interesting. Let's think about that for a minute. And how does that change me or my beliefs and things? And so I don't know, maybe that's why I feel so settled when it comes to exploring every religion. I mean, I don't feel threatened by any of it. I think it's all interesting and I'm curious about all of it. Obviously want greater understanding, but in the case of were things translated perfectly, I wouldn't think so. It's not man's forte to be perfect. None of us have ever been perfect or will ever be perfect. We all make mistakes. And I think it's important to give people grace. Like, could you imagine being tasked with the job of having to translate all these old texts and you're like, what does this word mean? I mean, I imagine them sitting around a table debating, like, what does this word mean? And how do we do this storyline so that people will think like, oh yeah, that's a cohesive thought? Because I mean, what if it was just, it's funny. I actually wrote somebody a letter and because I thought, let's start writing letters every Sunday because we haven't been writing letters. We've been doing emails. So I started writing letters and after I was done, I read it and I was like, I'm completely fragmented like an email. Because emails you can go and like cut and copy, but after you write it down, it's there. What if that's what it was, where it's like they're just sitting at their, table or whatever they were sitting at, and their family was around them while they're writing this text, and they got interrupted, and then they went back and tried to finish the thought, and they lost their spot. Who knows,
I
And
know
I
exactly.
isn't that like the fun of all of this, where it's like, gosh, could you imagine that person who wrote it and translated it and all the things?
Plus, there's all this colloquial stuff that's very regional. Like
Hmm.
we talk about the difference between words in England. They don't call it the bathroom, they call it the loo. They don't call
Yes.
the subway, they call it the tube. We talked about how the younger generation will say something that they really like. They'll say, that's sick. So imagine somebody 300 years from now
Slang.
trying to interpret this language when it's so, and I
Right.
like that this scholar that we referenced in the very beginning of this episode, that he was talking about the local dialect of Latin, which was called Koine, Koine. Like I said, words are just symbols. And I think the only way that we are so comfortable in the format of this podcast, exploring all the things that we explore, is because we already have a real solid foundation that is never threatened. And it takes a while for people to maybe wrap their mind around that concept and have something that they can really feel comfortable with. Also taking into consideration that we are human beings and we have
Mhm.
different survival instincts that are just built into us, including, the fear of death and that sort of thing. Well,
Right.
all right. All right. I love this. So, Wendy, tell everybody how they get in touch with us.
You can find us at spiritualcake.com, where you can go back and listen to or read any of our previous episodes. You can click one of the two social media icons and join us on Facebook or Instagram, or you can send us a message requesting a topic or even to join the conversation.
Absolutely. And when you do join the conversation, please know we welcome you with open arms. That's it for this episode of the Spiritual Cake Podcast. This is Clint on behalf of Wendy. We will see you next time.